This is the beginning of a video series I have wanted to do since the beginning of building Rotaries, which is like a week ago. I want to know how much boost, how much power a stock 2-rotor is capable of handling, so that way your money and time, more importantly, can be spent on better things. We all know that it takes a year to do a rebuild because, okay, you got a buddy that's got a machine and he's busy, but then you got a friend and you got to order things. No. Those days are over. I want to show you the maximum ability of a stock FD motor, both with and without minor modifications that you can do yourself. That way you're not spending months waiting on other people and you're not spending tons of money on rebuilding the engine. I am so sick of all of these shops saying, oh, you need to do this, you need to machine this, you need to do... No, you don't. You do not. And I'm going to show you just how efficient these motors can be. The very first step was testing the limits of the stock motor, and I sure as hell found it. Not talking peak ideal situations, we had issues. We had just like a normal person. Nothing's perfect in a normal street build. And we saw where the limits were. These are the irons from a stock FD 2-rotor. This isn't remanufactured or anything like that, and you can see some very interesting things showing up already. This is the motor in the Corvette that did about 550 foot-pounds of torque and 500 horsepower before it finally let go. What happened? This is the rotor from the infamous Rotary Vet that did the 500 foot-pounds of torque, 500 horsepower at the rear wheels. That was amazing, but we kept pushing it more and we found its limits. Two things happened. One is that it detonated or pre-detonated, and that occurred for the same reason that this thing is so dirty for being a brand new engine. What happened was I had the return line on my turbo too low, and it was starting to spray crankcase oil, not my premix, but also normal crankcase oil into the combustion chamber. Oil has a much lower octane rating than fuel, and I paid the price for that. But that's a very realistic scenario to happen. Nothing is perfect. This is a stock 2-piece apex seal, just a major piece of it. Nothing crazy about it. It's an OEM piece that comes from Mazda. This is that same piece on meth. not like meth, like literally methamphetamines, not meth, the fuel. It chipped the tip. There are two reasons why this occurred. So here's one of the two issues with stock apex seals. If you were to take this and hold it all the way to the very edge of the rotor housing, it is the exact length side to side. So when the engine expands from a combustion event like this, the stock tension bolts are notorious for being slightly weaker than they should be, and the whole engine expands. Well, the party has to come back down to earth, and once it collapses back in, it actually contacts the tip of this seal to the irons. These are made out of beautiful cast iron, and they collapse, and then you chip the tip. Why is that tip not as strong as it should be? Without being a metal guy, you already know that there's things called heat treating, and they do a lot of weird shit to metal to make it stronger or better. In this case, the top half of this seal, right to that point, coincidentally, is heat treated. So this top part here is meant to be heat treated, so that way when it touches the inner part of the chrome surface, harder metals, they're more brittle, but with oil, they do well against each other and prevent wear. The bottom half is much softer material. So along here, when you have an event occur, it has a softer part to absorb more of the shock. And of course, it chipped the tip exactly halfway where the heat treating stops, and there's no softer material behind this corner to absorb that sort of extra impact. All of that together meant a catastrophic failure. I speculate that the tip broke off on one run, and then it waited until the next run when we were at peak torque to let go. You can hear it. You can hear it right at maximum torque. This engine said, I'm out. Very interesting. The tip came out of the groove of the apex seal and then just decided to do a chimichanga right through the housing. So I ruined both the rotors and the housings. Thankfully, I got new ones. In the interest of being really cheap, it makes me wonder if you took this down about 5/1000ths of an inch, could you use these stock 2-piece seals? But honestly, at that point, why not just buy new aftermarket seals? They're already clearanced for this sort of reason. There we go. Oh my God. Thank God this camera has stabilization because my knees just went weak.
So pretty.
Stock FD rotors. Brand new. In their own little cheese wheel. Brand new bearings. Brand new rotors, never been used. Yeah.
Got the oil on there to prove it.
That's right. Yeah. Yes. Those are brand new FD, or even FC, it doesn't really matter at this point. Turbo 2 or FD rotor housings. Yeah, I think those are Turbo 2, but same thing, same difference. Brand new. Oh, here, go ahead, turn those sideways. Oh, yeah. I am going out of my way to make sure this engine is as stock as possible. So I even have a micrometer. It's basically like a very advanced form of calipers that are very, very sensitive. We're gonna make sure that the rotors are clearance to the housings the same way they were on this engine previously. So no funny business. This is still a stock motor. Minus two little things that we're gonna do that are the least expensive way to make this engine reliable. I already have it set for the other engine. We're gonna go ahead and compare these rotor housings. And sure enough, that is exact. So that's a good sign from Mazda that they're right there. I'm jiggling it. We're jiggling. So these rotor housings are the exact same width as the other ones, which means that the E-shaft is going to be almost identical, end play and all that. Now it's the rotor's turn. Rotors should be, you can actually hear it jiggling. Rotors should be clearanced so that way they don't hit the edge of this. FD rotors particularly actually have a little bit more taken off the edges here. Not a lot. People will take off more, but FD rotors actually are clearanced on their sides. You'll hear it called side clearance. So we'll take a look at the actual part right here and tighten that in. And that's about, again, we're about 10 thousandths, somewhere in there. You can see all these specs online. This is not magic on my end. So we're at, just relatively speaking, we're at 17. And then we'll go to here. And that's about 13. And we'll go to the edge here. As accurate as possible. And that's about a 5. So even from this area here, all the way around to the outer edges, you went from what, 13 to 5. That is to prevent this corner from hitting over here. So what you can actually see is that on the stock motor, it did actually contact, when it was going nuts, it did contact a little bit and produce a little bit more wear. There is no actual step wear, but it did, you can see, start polishing it a little bit more than we want. So these rotors are identical in width to the previous stock rotors, which is good. Mazda's got consistency here. We don't have to spend more money. One more thing we're gonna do, just to verify a couple of different things all at once, is check the weight. 4366, so 4366. 4364. That's very rare to have Mazda even have it that close. So these rotors are almost identical to each other. That's like, they were almost designed for this combination. Just for reference, so you guys know, they have casting numbers. As the casting gets worn out, you know what series they are. These are C, which is pretty common in my line of business. In my world, the C series, all mine have been C. Yeah, all you know, the millions of rotors I've dealt with, which are 5, are all C or D. And don't let those numbers fool you, because they actually can be very similar. Even though some people say that is the weight, it's not. You can have D that are close to C and so on. They're not, it's a little deceiving there. Let's go ahead and weigh the stock ones and compare those as well. I took all the oil seals and every sort of seal off there, so we are comparing these apples to apples, but as you can tell, there's more oil on there. So the other ones were at 4366, 4338, 4344, so these were a little bit more out of spec. So these are slightly lighter than those, and let's see what numbers these are. Funny, they're actually D, which should have been later in the casting, which means they should have been heavier. The other thing is these counterweights. As you saw, Logan, in my previous video on the 4-rotor, balancing this is no joke, but a 2-rotor benefits from the fact that it's not as long. Say a 6-rotor even, a small weight imbalance out here is insane. On a 2-rotor, you can get away with a little bit more. Now this is me giving advice, and I truly believe it because I did it myself. The stock FD motor was manual, right? can't swap clutches. Here's why. This is the stock flywheel. The flywheel itself has your counterweight built into it, right there. So you'd think, oh cool, that's neat. I'm good, I can just swap clutches. Nope, this thing's heavy as hell and just isn't conducive for the standard clutch setup. What do people do? They swapped an automatic rear counterweight. This counterweight is off of, I don't know what, and obviously an automatic, but check this out. The counterweight system is built into this, and then all you do is you bolt any aftermarket flywheel / clutch setup onto here. I've now changed from a known counterweight to an unknown one. Thankfully, again, two rotors are so stable, so solid, that never caused any extra wear. The bearings are perfectly fine. There's not an issue. So in a pinch, obviously, again, we're avoiding all that insane machine work. This was ran for quite a while, did the long road trips back and forth to Vegas. All of this is wonderful, but the very first step to building a rotary engine actually starts with the most obvious part of the car, packing the rotors. That's kind of the phrase for this. What we're gonna do is put the side seals in, the corner seals, the apex seals. These are all pretty standard. It's making these custom for each of these lengths. They're off by a slight bit, nothing's perfect. So we're gonna go ahead and go through that whole process, get these things ready to be put in the engine. That's a whole day process by itself. Assembling the engine is another day. I want to point out this is not sponsored. I paid full price for this stuff, so the jury's out right now, but this is a set of aftermarket apex seals. We'll be testing them and making sure they work, obviously, before I start talking about who they are, but you can probably figure out who they are. It's a very interesting difference, and we'll go through the difference between these and stock seals as well. Aftermarket apex seals, you still go with the stock side seals, so these are all slightly longer. So here are the stock coolant seals. I want to bring this to you guys' attention because they're a one-time use thing, especially these orange ones. They've got 3 pieces in there. Once the engine's kind of heated up, or even if you're like me and you use Vaseline, they'll swell a little bit, fine, but again, one-time use. Alternatively, you can do aftermarket seals. So again, we'll be testing these as well. That way if there's an issue, we would have all heard about it, but if there's an issue on my build, it's just honest documentation of what's going on. I get asked so often, what apex seals are you using? And the problem with that is if I tell you what apex seals I'm using, you're gonna think that that is the only brand that works. That kills me to no end. Yes, it is the brand that worked in my build. But for example, my 3-rotor for all those years used RA Super Seals. You hear a lot of controversy about those, but you also see that my engine made tons of power for more than 10 years on those seals. You get what I'm going to. It's anecdotal at best, but what I want to do is profile all of these different apex seals and then just share with you the results. Here's a literal back-to-back comparison between aftermarket seals on the right with stock 2-piece seals on the left. And so far, nothing too crazy. Yeah, the finish looks different, but oh, there's the issue right there. The first thing you notice is the aftermarket seal adds more of a chunk to that corner piece, meaning that it's less likely to snap off if the tip hits something crazy. But the overall length, when you combine these all together, they're also clearanced for that as well. Not going to be noticeable on camera because it's like a couple thou. So the whole point of this is that that little tip on the right side of the aftermarket seal is not going to hit the iron on the right side in the case of a insane detonation event. We now have this rotor right here ready for packing. It's interesting because you think, oh, apex seals, that's the very first thing. Nope, don't even touch those. We're gonna focus on the side. We'll take the ones out of the previous engine. These are all the oil control rings and their springs, and since they're out of almost a brand new engine, we're gonna put them back in. We're gonna split these up by color. Nice little trick to this process. Okay, if we still have all the rubber, at least everything's all accounted for. Those are white and white, blue, blue. Yeah. You don't need those colors, but you can actually do it by hand, but that saves you a little bit of effort. You have them up like this. This end goes down, this end goes up. And then on this side, this end goes down and this goes up. You can't flip them like this. That was one of my first questions. They're built with a pointy tip for the bottom side. We'll say this is the rotor, and the funny part is it depends on your mood, which rotor you want it to be, but the pointy tip goes into that little hole right there. Oops, oh, yeah, on the smaller one. You spin it, and then it actually ends up catching in that hole. So, and then that no longer spins, obviously once it's pushed down, I just broke it free of that. I think there's two, yeah, there's two sides, two holes. Doesn't matter which, but.
That's what she said.
I grab Jason's magic tool. Okay, so yeah, there's like a whole art to just these. But yeah, one here, and on the inner one here, and one here. So the way we determine, obviously we're going to use each one of these for one side of the rotor. We don't use all of these, you know, all whites on one rotor or all blues on one rotor. So we'll set that aside. First plate is actually the very front of the engine. This will be the first rotor. And so the gear is actually going to be sitting at the very front of the engine. So that's the very first rotor. We'll even put it on both sides just in case, but we're going to look at it from that side. We'll just put one, rotor one. So we know rotor one is rotor one. And that's literally the rotor that we'll do top dead center off of, all that sort of shit. So this is the front of the engine. The engine's going to rotate from up here, you know, intake, combustion or compression, combustion, exhaust. So it's going to spin this way. And actually, when you spin this way, actually, in physics terms, you actually use like this. So it spins like this. When it spins that way, you don't want the rings to spin this way, you know, because they're going to spin with the iron. So you're actually putting these in based on the direction that this rotor is going to spin to keep the oil control rings to stay with the rotor. So right now we have the engine spinning like this. So there's a force going backwards, right? You know, like they want to stay still. So you actually want the spring organized to block it this way. This would do it. Yeah, this is the correct choice. And there's like guides on like, okay, white goes on the front side of rotor one or whatever. But let's say we put it in like that. Pretend there's the notch on the inside there. That's flat notch. Now, once that's in, that's going to prevent it from rotating this way. So as the engine's spinning, that stays with the rotor. Rotor 2, the gear is this way. So we have to go the reverse on the other side. It's basically anything that's on this side of the engine gets the, what is this, the white set. So anything that's on the front or when we're stacking on the bottom of the engine, gets the white set. So it's preventing them from rotating that way. And then the blue set goes on the back. On the back side of this, you can, if you put these upside down, you're gonna make your life really bad. But there's two notches as well there. So it catches on those.
Oh, okay.
White one in there. So both the white ones are pointing up in that direction. Okay, perfect. We're actually using this just to really hold it in. It's not lubrication as much as it's just holding it. And these do hold in really well by themselves. We'll go ahead and put this one in, it's the outer one. And this one's the inner one. Find the notches, put them upside down. So the next thing we'll do, and this is actually for the sizing part of it, we will use the old corner seals. These are stock corner seals. We'll be fine with that for the moment. So stock corner seals are very weak right there. It's by design, and they have this rubber piece on the inside. It's meant to seal it. I mean, this is technology from back then. People have found slightly better technology, and you know, it's one of those controversial kind of things. You never have to actually take this out. I just want to show for the camera. We're gonna go ahead and use one of the old Apex seals. It's kind of like a tool as we go. Get 3 of those ready. And you can actually see on these, the darker side was the back side, because you actually also see the spring where it was at on those. These are very fragile too. I squeezed one like this and it popped. I needed to know. I needed to know if that would work. And we're also gonna take from the previous motor, we're gonna take these little earring looking things. Those are the springs that go underneath this. Stock Mazda springs. A lot of these things actually just use stock springs. Apex seals, side seals, they all use stock Mazda springs. The older ones were actually like really stringy looking things from like the first gens. You don't use those either. So what can happen, this happened a lot in my previous installations. Put a little bit of, and put that on. The snug fit is a good fit. that's in. Say you go to install the rotor and you do this while it's sitting on and in, these will actually spin. The spring underneath this will get cockeyed like that, and when you go to drop the apex seal in, it won't go through. So what your goal is once you have this packed, you make sure that it's all clearanced like that, and then when you go to set it into the motor, you do not adjust it. Otherwise, as soon as you adjust it, those get out of whack. Some people will actually install it with the seals like this, like without springs, and they'll pull them back out and do that. There's a lot of other tricks. They all work. And then some people will actually super glue the two pieces together, which I think is actually kind of a cool thing, because I actually had on the 3-rotor, somehow I've opened it this way, that little corner piece the engine didn't go all the way down, and it crushed the very tip of the corner piece together. We won't do that with this engine. That was a kind of cool thing.
Unless you're building freaking motors. I didn't know that shit.
Unless you're building these. Yeah. So we'll go ahead and put this in there, and then we'll go put this in there. We're setting these up to figure out the lengths of the side seals. These are all previous side seals and side seal springs. We will reuse the springs. These were for different rotors. Those are for the original rotors. So what I'll do, I'm not going to put it in there because I'll screw myself over really quick. I will put a spring in there. This is something I got roasted on before, rightfully. There's this minor detail. Again, I'm going to use really light pressure on these because they're very small and soft. So they both, on each end of this thing, have the spring actually goes up like this. I'm curved, they go up. Or if you go this way, they go down. If you install it with those tips down, and for some reason, while the engine's going crazy, that can slide under the corner seal and they get crushed. And it really won't do too much, but it could gum it up. It could create issues. It could cause this to wear harder. So we're going to install it with the tips of these corners up.
If you think about it, it makes sense, but
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
if I'm really thinking about it, I'm like, it's a fucking spring. Who fucking cares?
Yeah, exactly. On this, if you were going to reuse these seals, you can actually see the notches. They're not notches, but the notches where the peaks of the spring rub against this.
Wear marks.
Yeah, wear marks. Yeah. So, and then the other side's flat. So you would go this route. We'll just gently try this one randomly, and you can already see the problem. It's way far away. That's a whole bunch of boost.
Ceiling pressure,
yeah. Boost just slide through. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab that. Now I didn't clearance them on the 4-rotor because that was again the same ones. We just kind of figured out which ones were which. And we have 0.004 right here.
Okay.
So this is pretty standard, easily passed through. Out of curiosity, I'm actually interested in seeing how big is the gap. Bigger than that. So that's 18 thousandths. The difference between that and that. Dave taught me a really cool trick if you don't have a feeler gauge, is basically, and I'll actually do it on this one, is that you push it in the middle, you push it on the sides, middle, sides. So that little bit of bend, if the sides touch, it's too close. But so it was really cool because clearly it's not even remotely touching either sides. So these should be the Mazda OEM ones that are slightly oversized for this very reason. So we should see the reverse problem happening right now. We're already hitting on both sides. This is going to take a little bit of guesswork, getting comfortable with it and everything. This is a chunk of a rotor right here, and you're actually going to go like this, and then boop, boop, boop. A little guide. And you just hear it. We'll see how well that worked. You can actually feel it. It took enough off to get it to slide in, and I could force it in, but it would wedge. So we're gonna rinse and repeat.
Yeah, your nose is friggin' in and out.
Okay, so we're gonna use this as a finishing tool, only because the surface looks so much better. Obviously, the smoother it is, the better the oil likes it. I'm being very gentle. I'm not bending this at all. So we'll go ahead there. Go ahead there. And so that's almost exact, like not in a good way. This is 1500. I'm sure you could start lower. So it feels like almost good, but then as soon as you start to do the bend, you can feel it binding up. There we go. That is perfect. So this is now sole bonded to this side of the rotor face. Get any sort of metal filings off. And that's a good sign too. It's not binding up there either.
Dropped in really smooth, yeah. That's fucking dope.
Okay, so we'll breeze through a lot of this, but I just wanted to show people that it's a rinse and repeat process. And the hardest thing I think for a rotary engine to me is remembering to do every single small step. Hey, make sure that the tips of these go up. Hey, make sure you even put a spring in there before you do that, and so on. Because you're like, oh yeah, I just was focusing on machining and sharpening this, and you forget to go to the next step. Because that's definitely not gonna fit. We got the second one done. As expected, too large. I'm gonna go ahead and tighten this one up. Fitting this last one. Okay, let's see how we're doing. Finally. It's such a, let's see if it passes the, we are in business. Okay, one rotor face is done. There's a couple different ways to do this, and I think I'm gonna keep everything on there, put the baby blue blanket under there, and so we're just gonna simply flip it over, rinse and repeat. So we're gonna keep these here, and then of course the corner seals will turn. Once we get the rotor finished and we set it on its side, we'll just re-straighten these out, call that a day. But that way we don't have to mix these up. So here goes the pizza flip. There. There is rotor number 1, all cleaned up, ready to go. All 6 side seals are in properly. All 6 corner seals are looking good. Jason's working on rotor number 2. He's got the oil control rings in, and he's starting to set in the side seals. We now have rotor 1 completely finished, ready to go, minus apex seals. Jason finished this side beautifully, so we're gonna flop that one over and get that for the last final side. I prepped this surface. This is the very front of the engine. You can see, like that. So my rotor actually is gonna do exactly how my rotor is sitting right now, is going to transplant over to here. Of course, we'll stand it up on its side, make sure that the side seals and corner seals on the back side look good, but that's its home. So when it comes to assembling an engine, there's 3 things I like to use. I actually do like to use the motor oil, especially if the parts are completely bone dry, because that's the oil that's going to be used to lubricate it. Might as well introduce it to its new best friend. So especially with the VR1 with the high zinc, it's perfect for coating the outer surfaces of the rotors, anything that really just generally needs a soft amount of lubrication. When the engine is running, that's what's pumping through the heart of it. That's what's going through all of these bearings and through the E-shaft and all that. But until then, if you're going to be cranking it over by hand to test compression, make sure nothing's weird, I'll use like a full grease. It doesn't have to be synthetic, but just a grease works really well. And then also, this one's a little bit of an interesting approach to it. I'll use a gear oil, or even I'll go back to oil if I don't have gear oil, but I'll use an oil on the outer surface of the rotor housing and on the irons, so that way these aren't rubbing metal to metal when you're first spinning it over by hand until you build oil pressure. And for those of you wondering, this wild, crazy grease ends up dissolving into the oil. You want to do an oil change pretty quickly after building an engine, especially a race engine, but all that grease that's sitting on the inside of the bearings needs to get out. And so sure enough, it does. It actually goes through the oil, and then you do an oil change, and now you just have the correct oil in the engine.